This always happens with any disruptive technology. And part of my research was researching what has happened historically to other disruptive technologies through history. And so I studied the bicycle, the radio, the internet, the automobile, and I found a very recurring pattern. They've shown evidence where it stabilizes grids, where it's mitigating methane, where it's decarbonizing heat by using clean electrical exhaust heat from Bitcoin mining rather than fossil fuel driven heat. Not a single media outlet took up the study. In theory, yes, but in practice, stablecoins are highly centralized, so it's much easier for regimes such as Nigeria to clamp down on stablecoins, as they did. I have to deal with a lot of, let's just say, uneducated takes on Bitcoin a lot of the time. And it's very easy to get frustrated, exasperated, angry even. But the moment you've done so, you've actually lost the most important form of sovereignty, which is sovereignty over your own mind.
You're one of the most important figures when it comes to fighting the environmental fight, especially when in 2021 that we had. Now it seems to be a little bit more silent around that topic from outside of the Bitcoin world, and it's shifting really to the positive side. But for the few people that might not know you or are unfamiliar with what you're doing, can you give us a quick overview of who you are, what you're doing, and why you're excited about Bitcoin?
So I'm a latecomer to Bitcoin. I really only got involved in 2022. I was a climate tech investor at the time, and I started to ask the question about how much impact our fund was having and concluded it wasn't very much. So we went looking around for other technologies that could have a deeper climate impact. And much to our surprise, we found that Bitcoin mining could have a really positive climate impact. But that was not my impression when I first looked at it. Because like a lot of people, I looked at it and thought it uses too much energy and it's not doing anything useful other than a speculative asset. But thankfully, I paused and took a deep breath and decided to do some research and challenge my initial reflexive negative impression of it. And as a result, I found some counterintuitive truths and really for my own edification started researching it more deeply, but shared the research results of what I've been finding. And much to my surprise, I found a whole community of Bitcoiners who I think had been maligned for a long time, particularly the Bitcoin mining community, who were very grateful that someone from the outside, I mean, I'm not on the outside now, but I was at the time, was doing independent research, looking at the true environmental impact in a data-driven way, and coming up with some very different conclusions to a lot of the mainstream narratives at the time, which were based on, to be frank, some pretty shoddy studies and assumptions.
It's super interesting. There was this famous, I forgot how it was called, but basically there was a study that forgot to include the difficulty adjustment, and they just made the assumptions without the difficulty adjustment in mind. Where I'm like, that's just lazy if you don't even include that, or you have an agenda.
Yeah, one or the two. It's always one of those two. Usually it's just lack of knowledge, but I would say in maybe 1 out of 5 cases, there is an agenda. But all you need is one person with an agenda and then a whole lot of people who don't do the research, who assume that original piece of research was good quality where it wasn't. And that's how you get misinformation spreading and becoming very prevalent, which is exactly what happened.
How did you come over that? If you have the impression that Bitcoin is bad for the environment and you're like, okay, looking at that, how did you overcome that? Like what data-driven things that you see that you're like, okay, that actually is not true and it actually is the counterintuitive thing?
I've been wrong about things a lot in my life. And a lot of the times I've got it wrong is when I had an initial impression and I formed a judgment. So I think just over time and having made a lot of mistakes, I've learned that sometimes our initial impressions about things are not accurate. Some things have counterintuitive truths. I'll give you an analogy. So imagine if you're at the time of the Copernican revolution and this crazy person is claiming that the Earth revolves around the sun. And you say, well, that's obviously nonsense. I've got my own senses. I can see visually clearly that it's rising in the east every morning and it makes a circuit and it sets in the west. So clearly it's revolving around, the sun is revolving around the earth because our senses tell us this. But the counterintuitive truth, of course, that we discovered or rediscovered was that there are two revolutions. It's revolving around the sun at the same time as it's revolving on its axis, therefore creating the illusion that the sun revolves around the earth. So some things in life are counterintuitive, and it's only on deeper investigation that that counterintuitive truth emerges. And sometimes they're not. Sometimes you do that at deeper analysis and you find out, well, my initial impression was right. But you have to suspend that disbelief. And as I say, I've been wrong about things a few times. And so I've just learnt over time not to place too much credence on an initial appraisal of anything. And so my tendency these days, if I haven't looked into something deeply, I won't make a judgment on it. For that reason, I don't make a whole lot of people ask me on my opinion on a whole bunch of things. And most of the time, the answer is, I don't know, because my opinion isn't informed. I haven't looked into it deeply. But when I have, then I'm happy to say, well, this opinion is informed by some data, and I'm happy to share it. So I think it's just a radical process of self-scrutiny and learning through mistakes over time. And if we can be good at learning from our own mistakes and acknowledging when we make them, then I like to think that it makes us more curious people who are at least less likely to repeat the same mistakes.
I love that. And it's so hard because we have to normalize saying, I don't know. And people sometimes even get upset if you say, I don't know, because they think you're on the opposite side and you don't want to upset them or whatever is going on. Like if you, for example, in the beginning of the Ukraine war, I had no clue about that. I did not look anything up. I like nothing at all. And people are like, oh, like what's your stand on the Ukraine war? And I'm like, no clue. Like I haven't looked at anything. And they thought like, oh, like I use a Russian. Like, no, like I really just like never looked at it. And, I don't know. It's this saying like, I don't know. I haven't formed an opinion on that is seeming not to be something that most people are comfortable doing. Like it's something unnormal.
Yeah. Knowledge of ignorance is also knowledge. And so knowing where you have gaps in your understanding is really a precondition to being able to avoid more mistakes, avoid unnecessary judgment, avoid getting into arguments that are unnecessary. But also in the context of the work that I do as a coach, for example, it's absolutely critical. So if you're a CEO of a company, you have to know yourself and you have to know your gaps and your areas where you don't know stuff really well, because then you can recruit people who know the stuff that you don't know. It was exactly the same when I formed CH4 Capital. That's our infrastructure investment fund, which is doing Bitcoin mining, specializing in using landfill gas as the power source to turn it into electricity, use it to mine Bitcoin in remote places. Do you think I knew about landfills? Do you think I knew about carbon credits? Do you think I knew about Bitcoin mining at any deep degree? And I certainly didn't know about infrastructure financing. So there were really 4 pretty major areas that I didn't know. But knowing that I didn't know it meant that I could embark on the task of saying, well, there's 2 paths. Either I learn about it, that's going to be long and hard, or better, I find people who know the stuff that I don't know. And that's normally a lot shorter and easier. And that's what I did. And we formed a company who now have those incredible skills plugged. And my job is not to be the expert on anything, but to know the people who are and to know when to ask which person the right question. There was an anecdote about Henry Ford which really inspired me and also made me laugh. Apparently, there was a time when the US government was trying to break up Ford Corporation for being too monopolistic. And so there was a big antitrust inquiry. And Henry Ford had his 3 top advisors, and he was being scrutinized by some US Senate committee, I imagine. And they were asking all these questions. And Henry Ford wasn't answering a single one. He had his 3 top experts, and he just deferred to one, John, Charlie, Fred. And those are pretty much the only 3 words he said, were the 3 names. And after about 10 minutes of this US senator got quite irate and said, excuse me, Mr. Ford, I don't mean to be forward, but do you actually know anything about anything? And to which Henry Ford said, sir, it is not my job to be the expert. It is my job to know the people who are and ask them the right question. And I always remember that, and I thought that's really good advice, because to try to be the expert on everything, you're going to crash and burn. And Bitcoin is not just a monetary system, but it's really Troy Cross describes it as an epistemological humility test, because you have to acknowledge that there's so much about it that you just don't know. And if you pretend you know, or you pretend to yourself that you know about it, you'll be found out pretty soon. And so continuing to be curious in Bitcoin, not just in Bitcoin, but in anything, but Bitcoin's a good test case, is really important in terms of being able to further your understanding, deepen your understanding, and make a contribution.
Yeah, it's like I've now over 500 years, my 506th podcast, and only on Bitcoin, like Bitcoin only, and I still have every week something like, oh, like I never thought about that perspective, or that I didn't know about that on Bitcoin. And like, when does the point come when there's like no new things coming? I don't know, probably never coming. There's always new things coming.
Because, knowledge is infinite, and even within a very, very, very small subsector of knowledge, you're discovering that even that's infinite. And even if you could know everything, then the next minute it would be different, because the world would have changed.
Absolutely. Real quick, I didn't know that you were coaching. Who are you coaching, and what is that doing?
Well, that's something I've done for a little while now. So my background was with technology companies, and then after stepping down from one I'd founded, I really worked out that the biggest gap in the whole technology ecosystem was the ecosystem does a pretty good job in training you in the business side, and training you on the product side and the hyperscaling side. That's pretty good. But where it's not so great is really scaling the human side. And sometimes we forget that it's humans that build companies. It's humans that build products. It's humans that create business models, and the reason for business models being successful or not. And so we don't optimize the potential of the humans, both as individuals, but also the communication and connections between them. Then we're failing to optimize the most important thing in the success of a technology company. So I spent about a decade specializing in training founders in a bunch of things that I felt were incredibly important based on my own experience as a founder, and then branched out and started working with other leaders more generally. And recently I've been working with some Bitcoiners who are founding new ventures, some exciting stuff that I can't say too much about right now. But very exciting stuff. And again, working on the same thing, working on the combination of the skill set, the mindset, a little bit on the strategy and tactics, but that's not as important. If you're an athlete, if you're in a football team and you want to win, having the right game day strategy is important. But having a whole bunch of people who have the skills to be able to execute that strategy is 99% of what's important. So I focus on the stuff about the actual ability to execute upon a strategy, having the right mindset, the right skill set, the right behaviors, the right things you're doing, the actions you're taking on a day-to-day basis.
Super interesting. I did not know that about you that at all. One thing I've wanted with the environmental things to come back to that a little bit. When we look at the numbers that usually people portray in the mainstream media, and now it's getting a little less like that, they're like, looking at transaction costs, and they're looking at what energy is consumed per transaction, and then they scale it up. What data did you focus on when you first kind of focused on like if Bitcoin is actually bad or good for the environment, and what impact does it had? Like, what did you see like where Bitcoin is in the environmental impact?
Well, the first thing I noticed, and this wasn't me noticing it for the first time, many people had noticed it before and commented on it before, is that Bitcoin's energy use doesn't come from its transactions. So this was a made-up metric. And to give an idea of how you can make up a metric, let's imagine that you have a car, and through the course of a year, you like to play your radio in the car. Okay, so you can work out how many emissions your car is creating per year if it's a petrol-driven car. You can work out how many songs you're playing during a year. Therefore, based on this, you can work out the emissions per song that you play on the radio, right? Now, you can see the flaw in that. It's very obvious that playing more songs on the radio doesn't cause you to emit more emissions in your car. And that's obvious. And you smile because everyone knows that. However, everyone knows how radios work, everyone knows how cars work, and everyone knows that the two are independent. But not everyone understands how Bitcoin works. And so because people don't understand that the way the transactions work, that's like playing songs on the radio, and the way that mining's working, that's like driving your car. When you say Bitcoin energy use per transaction, people don't go, what? That's stupid. That's crazy. Because into that knowledge gap, then all sorts of perversions of logic and of statistics are possible. And so it's a completely made up statistic. Now, we can smile at it, but the ironic thing is that misinformation is very pervasive. And so right now in the EU is trying to regulate based on energy use per transactions, a completely made up spurious metric. And you don't have to take my word for it. This has been debunked 4 times in peer-reviewed literature. Anyone who knows anything about Bitcoin mining will tell you the whole thing, the same story. And of course, we know that through the Lightning Network, you can have millions, if not billions of transactions, and it doesn't add a single bean to energy consumption. And so that's the first thing that I discovered. But the second thing is that we've kind of got into this pattern of thinking energy consumption bad, less energy consumption good, which is just not so, because not all forms of energy consumption are the same. So just in the same way, imagine if you were overweight. You're not, you look in good shape, but imagine if you were, and you went to a health practitioner, said, hey, I want to lose weight. And the health practitioner says, well, that's simple, eat less food. Now, it's not great advice. And the reason it's not great advice is it's not, for one thing, food's only one component, but put that to one side. The type of food you eat, I'm sure you'd agree, is more important than the quantity. So if you're eating a large quantity of lettuce each day, it's actually taking more energy to consume that lettuce than the energy you get from the lettuce. So in other words, the more lettuce you eat, the more weight you will lose. So you don't need to decrease your lettuce consumption. You don't need to decrease your consumption of fruit or of vegetables. You may want to decrease your consumption of other forms, such as chocolate cake. So in the same way, when it comes to consumption so food's just a form of energy, and not all energy sources are the same. They have different impacts. And similarly with energy on the grid, not all forms of energy consumption are the same. If you have a very inflexible type of energy consumer, such as an AI data center, in fact, that's worse than inflexible, because it's not only inflexible, but its energy pattern spikes unpredictably, which makes it very hard for a grid operator to counterbalance. And it also means that because they have very high energy requirements and they can't be down, then you tend to have to back it up with baseload sources of electricity, which is going to be hydro, nuclear, or fossil fuel. And if you don't live in a place which has a lot of rain or gravity combined, you won't have hydro. And if you don't live in a place which has had a lot of investment in nuclear energy, you won't have nuclear, which means your options are limited. So it basically means fossil fuel. And there's been a lot of studies that have been done that show that more AI data centers means more fossil fuel-based energy generation is necessary on the grid. So AI data centers, that's kind of like your chocolate cake as an energy consumption. Bitcoin mining, that's more like your fresh fruit and vegetable. That's exactly the thing you want more of. And again, we have a lot of peer-reviewed studies that back this up. The more consumption you have coming from flexible users of energy, and there is no more flexible user of energy than Bitcoin mining. Sean Connell calls them the Rolls-Royce of flexible load. Of course, you can shut them off and back on again in less than 500 milliseconds. They can be shut off for days, and they can deliver that power back at a very modular level. You can shut off exactly the amount that you want to balance grids, which is tremendously valuable. And when you have more flexible energy consumption on a grid, the more you have, that means two things. Number one, it means you can reduce the need for gas peaker plants, which is these plants you have that just sit and idle all year, just for that one peak event where they need to fire up and supply more energy. So you can actually get rid of them. And that's exactly what happened in Texas. They didn't need to make an $18 billion investment in gas peaker plants to counterbalance their proliferation of solar and wind-based energy. They used Bitcoin mining instead. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that you can build out your grid using more renewable energy because you have this load balancer. So if the sun goes behind a cloud, the wind stops blowing, you can instantly ramp down power consumption. And people say, well, you can use batteries to do that. Well, you can to an extent, but batteries can only discharge for so long. They like to be discharged the same day. And often battery operators don't have an economic incentive to do it until the price is really high. In other words, until there's already an emergency. Whereas Bitcoin mining companies are much more price sensitive. So the moment wholesale electricity price moves up even a fraction, which is a reflection that demand has increased, they will power down instantly. So they tend to exercise their delivery of power back to the grid much sooner. And the other thing is that sometimes people say, well, that's all very well, they can stop using energy. Is that really their only function? Well, no, it's not. Because there's more variable renewable energy on the grid in the first place because they have incentivized the build out of renewable energy. How? Two ways, as I mentioned, by counterbalancing its intermittency, but also by being a first customer. So in other words, a solar operator, a wind operator, before they even get grid interconnected, they can have a Bitcoin mining company co-located even before they're grid interconnected, paying them money, which means they're more economically viable. And because they're more economically viable, they're more likely to get financed. And because they're likely to get financed, then it's a going proposition, which will get grid interconnected. And also because they get profitable sooner, that renewable generator can do what any prudent business operator does, and that's plow their profits back into expanding their renewable operation. And that's exactly what has been happening at scale. And this is no longer theory. We hypothesized about this, but now we've seen evidence of this around the world. It's one of the reasons that TEPCO in Japan, Japan's largest utility, is using Bitcoin mining. It's the reason that Deutsche Telekom is using Bitcoin mining. It's the reason that Kango, who's got into renewable energy, has got into Bitcoin mining. And it's the reason that ERCOT is been using more than 3 gigawatts of Bitcoin mining. And the reason that it's been able to increase their variable renewable energy from 80 gigawatts up to 140 gigawatts within 3.5 years. We've got 20 scientific papers that back up its numerous climate benefits. We've got 7 independent studies that do that as well now. So the narrative really has shifted. When I was first researching this, I suspected these things were true, but I couldn't really see a lot of evidence in terms of case studies and documented studies that were showing it. And so people said, well, that sounds like greenwash. Well, we know now it's not. It's happening. It's happening at scale. And it's happening in many jurisdictions around the world, and it's only increasing. So not only is Bitcoin mining not an environmental problem, we've actually realized that it's a key part of many environmental solutions.
That's super interesting. I love how you make it super easy to understand also all those things. Why do you think, and the narrative completely shifted in my view, it's light and day from, let's say, 2021, where I think the peak of it was like Elon Musk saying he stops the payments because it's so bad for the environment, after he bought Bitcoin like 2 weeks later or something like that. That was kind of peak of the environment FUD, and then it just continued from there. And since BlackRock came in the game, or like since the last like 1.5 years, you don't hear a lot of that in the mainstream media. You sometimes hear it I sometimes hear it in my friend environment outside of Bitcoin, but very rarely, honestly. Why do you think the narratives actually have shifted? Is it just because now we have evidence of everything and it's like really hard to argue against the evidence? Or is like BlackRock and like maybe bigger players like that coming in the game also helping, maybe like with America?
Yeah, it's not BlackRock. The change started to take place before. So BlackRock's ETF, that was early Q1 2024. The shift really started to happen in Q4 2022. And then Q1 2023 really gained pace. And we can actually track this. There's a great organization called Bitcoin Perceptions that's tracked the change in the narrative. So we can pinpoint exactly when the reporting changed. The big hit piece in the New York Times was really the last major piece of FUD. And I think what happened after that was a few things. So one thing you've got to understand is that this always happens with any disruptive technology. And part of my research was researching what has happened historically to other disruptive technologies through history. And so I studied the bicycle, the radio, the internet, the automobile, a whole range of other technologies that disintermediated not one but multiple different industries. And I found a very recurring pattern, which is for the first 15 years or so, the media reception is extremely strong, unbalanced, non-evidence-based, often relying on authority figures who are espousing an opinion which is not empirically validated. And then that becomes the common perception. And if we look back through history, we can see some laughable instances of what people claimed about different technology. So the radio, for example, when that first came in, so that disintermediated live entertainment, the telegraph, the print media, and records. So 4 major industries. Now, do you think those 4 major industries just kind of stood back and said, well, here's the radio now, so we'll kind of go out to pasture and we'll accept lesser revenues? Of course they didn't. They wanted to enjoy their incumbency. So they used every tool at their disposal to attempt to put out misinformation about the radio, which was widely circulated through the media. And so we got stories such as radio responsible for jailbreaks, radio responsible for birds dying, responsible for snowstorms, responsible for antisocial behavior, responsible for suicides. These are actual news headlines we can point to. There's a site, if you don't believe me, look at the pessimist.org, I think it's called, which has documented a long list of how people have responded to different disruptive technologies through time. So Bitcoin's ridiculous headlines such as uses a swimming pool of water per transaction, we'll look back at them in a few years' time, some people looking back at them now and already laughing. It's like, how do we get it so wrong? Again, have we learned nothing through history? So irrespective of what your opinion is of the media and how reliable you think it is, we can all agree based on historical evidence that when it comes to reporting on disruptive technologies for the first 10 to 15 years, it's very unreliable because it's that combination of disintermediating multiple different industries, plus the general human psychological tendency to treat something which is unknown and not well understood with suspicion. And that's just something about human nature, which is there for survival reasons. It's not going to change, but it takes time to understand nascent technologies. And it takes more than a decade for the media to even start to stop misreporting, let alone correctly reporting. So that's a big part of it. And the other part is simply that, unfortunately, positive news stories don't make such good headlines. The Cambridge report came out a few weeks ago saying that, hey, Bitcoin mining, and by the way, to put this in context, Cambridge's report on Bitcoin mining is widely regarded by policymakers and regulators the world over as the gold standard of Bitcoin mining. It's independent, it's data-driven, they go through rigorous scientific methods. They've been out of date for about 3 years. But they've finally updated their data. And what this shows is that Bitcoin mining is 52% backed by sustainable energy. They've shown evidence where it stabilizes grids, where it's mitigating methane, where it's decarbonizing heat by using clean electrical exhaust heat from Bitcoin mining rather than fossil fuel-driven heat. Not a single media outlet took up the study. Not one. When the Cambridge report, the same report back in 2021, was showing that it was only 37% fossil fuel, 37% renewable energy, every major news outlet was picking up those reports. So there's also just a tendency in the media the world over that negative news sells better. So that creates this phenomenon where you don't have positive reporting at large. You have some, and there have been some good positive reports in the media, but there's just been a vacuum. where it's Bitcoin and energy is just not a topic that's widely reported on because you don't get the same sensational headlines anymore that you used to. It's opening new fossil fuel plants, which it never did. It's giving life to fossil fuel industry, which it never did. It's taking renewable energy away from other people who could be using it, which it never did, because it's a non-rival user of energy. We're just not seeing that sort of headline anymore.
Let's take a break for a moment and appreciate the beauty that Coin Vigilante has made with the Bitcoin watches. Those watches are the most amazing, the most elegant way of showing that you are a true Bitcoiner. And Coin Vigilante just dropped a completely new and amazing Genesis edition of their watch collections. You have the date of the first ever mined Bitcoin block in there, and of course also the block height and which epoch we are currently in. I love the level of detail they put in this masterpiece. Make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. And now if you have Bitcoin, I really do hope that you don't have it on exchange. But if you do have it on exchange, I have two ways for you to deal with that. The first way is you put it on a hardware wallet. That's the entry for you to get into the self-custody game. I recommend BitBox, Bitcoin only edition for that. It's a super simple and secure way. And if you check out the link in the description, you even get 5% off if you use the code Robin. And the second way is the Bitcoin Way. The Bitcoin Way is your all-in partner in terms of how to get the most out of your sovereignty. They will personalize for you a self-custody setup that is perfect for your individual situation. They will show you how you can secure your own devices. Securing your Bitcoin is not enough. You also have to keep all your devices secure. One topic that is overlooked often is the inheritance plan. What happens with your Bitcoin once you are no longer here? Do you have a plan for that in place already? And last but not least, if you're in the jurisdictions where you don't feel safe, it's better to get a plan B. For all that, head over to thebitcoinway.com/Robin to get a 30-minute free call. And just a quick side note, I will be for the first time ever speaking at the Bitcoin Prague event in June. It will be absolutely legendary and I'm really looking forward to seeing all of you there. You can get your ticket in the link down in the description of Bitcoin Prague, and very important, use code Robin to get 10% off your ticket. I'm really looking forward to seeing you there. It's super fascinating. It's because I also try to write headlines with a podcast, and I've seen, especially Bitcoin mining is always usually a flop. It's really hard to sell Bitcoin mining also to Bitcoiners as an exciting topic, mostly number graph technology or something that points indirectly to number graph technology. Obviously, is the thing most are clicking on. And it's that sensationalism that is kind of hard to get through. So like on the one hand, we always complain about that. We're like, hey, we want to find a signal and we want to find things. But then we're all humans and we click on the things that shock and things. And I think like if you scroll
right.
for Twitter,
these are things we can't fight that. We just acknowledge that certain things are true about human beings and that's unlikely to change. And we just look at it and say, okay, well, that's the way things are. And let's not waste energy trying to rewire the way that humans have functioned over hundreds of thousands or millions of years of evolution. Let's just work within those constraints, understand what they are, and seek about trying to re-educate people.
I like that approach a lot. How do you think Bitcoin, because it has such a unique properties for Bitcoin mining, has such unique properties for the energy market, how do you think it will impact the overall energy markets long term?
Now, this is a fascinating topic because coming back to your point around why should people be interested in Bitcoin mining, energy and finance, two pretty major systems. And in order to have a functioning society, we need money that's not broken and we need energy that's not broken. And right now, both are broken. Our financial systems are broken, but also our energy systems are broken. I think a lot of people understand the bit that money's broken, but fewer people in Bitcoin understand that energy is broken and understand the consequences of that. With me, it was the other way around. Because I came into Bitcoin mining first, I understood that energy was broken. And then by association with a lot of other Bitcoiners, I was like, hang on, what does this Bitcoin thing do anyway? And that came a good year after my foray into Bitcoin mining. And then I was like, hey, this system's also broken. Bitcoin solves a problem here. But coming back to how it's going to change energy markets and why is energy broken at the moment, there's really 5 things. Bitcoin's highly centralized, fossilized, subsidized, politicized, and wasteful. I'm not going to go through all of them in detail, but let's just pick on 1 or 2. When I say fossilized, I don't mean that it's fossil fuel dependent, although it largely is. I mean grid infrastructure is fossilized. It's really old. It's really broken. And you and I right now, which part of the world are you in right now?
Austria, Vienna.
You're in Austria. I'm in Costa Rica. Now, we're able to communicate without wires. This is occurring wirelessly. So I can exchange an idea, a thought, a sound wave, and it reaches you. Now, I can't do that with energy. I can't send you energy wirelessly. I can't say, hey, here is 52 kilowatt hours of energy. Maybe in the future I'll be able to, but not right now. So energy requires wires to move around. And so it's like the landline system was before we had cell phones. If a landline gets cut, it's not going to work. If there's too much congestion on the network, it doesn't get through. The network gets overloaded. And so around the world, you have these really aging bits of wired infrastructure delivering energy around, tremendously inefficient, tremendously congested, very old, large transmission losses as it transports energy around. And unfortunately, the way that governments have encouraged renewable energy onto the grids through subsidies has been creating the wrong incentives, because the subsidy and the incentive has not been to deliver energy to people who use it, but to simply build stuff. So, okay, that's great. If I'm going to get a big subsidy to building a solar generation, I can build it somewhere. And where am I going to build it? Where land's cheapest, so I maximize my returns. Now what happens? Now I look at where I built it, where the land is cheap. Now, why is land cheap there? Because no one's there. So where are the people? Well, not where my solar plant was, because otherwise the land would have been expensive. So they're somewhere else. Okay. Well, how do I get my solar energy from where the land was cheap to where the people live? Well, through the wires, through the grid. But the grid's fossilized. The grid's old. The grid needs a substation upgrade. And so you have this problem around the world where subsidies have caused people to build these big renewable energy projects where people cannot access that electricity. They cannot benefit, where it gets congested on the highway of energy transmission through the grid. Massive problem. And so then what's happened? Then you've had this backlash where people said, well, renewable energy is bad. It's wasteful. It creates white elephants. It's putting power prices up because the grid operator has to pay to curtail that renewable operator. And we have to use the backup energy anyway. We should have just had more gas or whatever. Now, those arguments are partially true, but they're not true at a root cause, because that's not a problem with renewable energy. That's a problem with how renewable energy generation has been subsidized and the type of locations that it's created for renewable energy without any thought about upgrading the grid. So Bitcoin mining comes along, and this is exactly what happened in Texas. Same thing. All the cheap land and the best wind and the best sun, West Texas. All the people live in East Texas. Aging grid, most of it got curtailed. Backlash was starting to occur. Bitcoin miners came in and they said, we will take that excess energy that no one else can use. We will co-locate in West Texas. What then happened is it meant that suddenly those renewable facilities that were in the process of getting a backlash against them, suddenly they became profitable. They became useful. They didn't have to curtail their load. They didn't create grid congestion problems anymore. In fact, because they'd helped to attract Bitcoin mining operations to them, you now had a benefit, which was this amazing load balancing capability. And that allowed more renewable generation to be built. So at the point where it would have started to taper off, it's been able to continue and accelerate and proliferate. So it's fundamentally changing energy markets. I say it's politicized because you tend to get these debates and you see this a lot, where a centre-right administration will come in, they'll abandon all the clean energy projects, they'll abandon the subsidies, and they'll say, we're going to drill, baby, drill, right? And then people are happy because then you get supposedly cheaper energy and supposedly energy security. And then there's a change, and people say, well, that's contributing to climate change. It's actually more expensive, that sort of energy, the renewables. We're going to go back to renewables, but they do it in the wrong way. Build them in the wrong places, give massive subsidies, use central bank money printing to subsidize them. And so you get this backlash. But then Bitcoin says, well, hang on, you can have cheap energy, you can have energy security, and you can have a decarbonized grid all at the same time. But you're only going to have three. You're only going to have what the political left and right want together if you use Bitcoin mining to counterbalance the variability of this renewable energy sources. And that way you actually get cheaper energy, because yes, renewable energy is cheaper than fossil fuel, but that's only true when it's being used. It's actually more expensive if it's sitting there idle in the middle of some desert, not transporting its electrons to people. Then it's more expensive. So Bitcoin allows renewable energy to deliver on its promise to be cheaper. That's good because it means more energy affordability. It means that you always have energy supply. So that's good for energy security. And it means that you can continue to decarbonize the grid. So that's good for decarbonization. So it hits all three. And so irrespective of what your priorities are and what you care about with energy, Bitcoin really is the enabler, which stops us from this backwards and forwards divisive politicization of energy to be able to look at it much more rationally and say, well, we can have everything. We don't have to make these sacrifices. And that's incredible because it's going to result in more energy abundance, more energy affordability, and cleaner energy for everyone.
I'm wondering, why Bitcoin is so renewable and other industries kind of lack that. And
other industries have a disadvantage in that they are not location agnostic. So if you're a steel factory or an aluminium smelter, you can't just co-locate a small operation next to a solar farm. So you will have had that built many years in advance, and you're basically limited. You can only use whatever the grid happens to be using. So same with the banking sector. If you're the banking sector, you can only have as much clean energy as the electrical sources you're using, which is the grid that you're using. So if you're in Paraguay, then yeah, you'll be 100% renewable. If you're in New Zealand, you'll be 83% renewable. If you're in Kazakhstan, you'll be 89% fossil fuel. If you're in the US, you'll be about 40% renewable. So you're limited by what the grid is using. But as Bitcoin mining companies, you don't have to be on the grid. You can be off the grid. And most of these off-grid operations favor the cheapest form of energy, which generally, not always, but generally is sustainably sourced. So that's what's enabled Bitcoin to be using way more. It's not that they're trying to do the right thing by the environment. They're trying to do the right thing economically by themselves, which is to source cheap energy, which just happens coincidentally most of the time to be sustainable. But because of this wonderful confluence, it's driven it to be accidentally much more sustainable energy base than any other industry in the world, any other major industry, certainly.
Is the same true for AI computing or like any sort of cloud computing that is also location independent?
Well, that's location independent. However, it needs a much more constant source of electricity because it's not flexible load for the most part. Now, it's becoming more flexible, and certain types of AI, such as training AI, is more flexible, but inference AI isn't. And it's not completely location agnostic because you still need a really good internet connection. You still have latency issues. So it's not as location agnostic. It's not as modular, and it needs a much more steady flow of energy. So you can't, for example, put a big Amazon data center on a landfill or in an oil field, or on a renewable energy generation farm or on a solar farm, because it's just not going to deliver that consistency of supply. But Bitcoin mining companies, you can. So the equation is quite different.
Interesting.
Now, having said that, what you can do is you can use Bitcoin mining, and here's the key thing. The key difference between an AI data center and Bitcoin mining, yes, of course, there's differences because one's more location agnostic, but the real difference is actually economic. the real difference is that a Bitcoin mining company, 80% roughly of your operational budget is spent on electricity. AI data center, you're lucky if it's 30%. So the economic incentive for an AI data center to source cheap electricity is much, much less than it is for a Bitcoin mining company. So that's why Bitcoin mining companies will be prepared to invest all this capex to chase cheap electricity, which may come from an oil field or from a landfill, whereas an AI data center is not going to do that to start with. And then the question comes, well, hang on a minute, but Crusoe Energy, they do have AI data centers that are operating on oil fields. And that's the whole point. They had to do Bitcoin mining first. So Bitcoin mining comes along, they invest the capex, they act as the catalyst. That catalyzes the building out of the gas collection systems and the generators, which is capital intensive. And then once they've done that and they've fully amortized, they've made their profit, then you can say, well, what else could we be doing with this? Well, we can move these Bitcoin mining rigs onto the next project, the next oil field, the next landfill, and we can put in an AI data center now. Or we can have AI data centers and Bitcoin mining in parallel. And rather than having to have two generators for AI data centers, because we need a fully redundant generator, we'll be using the redundant generator for Bitcoin mining whenever it's not being used. But when it's needed, then we'll prioritize it for backup for AI. So there's all sorts of either synergies or catalytic actions where Bitcoin mining comes in first and then helps other users of energy come in second that would not have happened without that catalyst.
So you're seeing AI and Bitcoin actually having some synergies and not being competition to each other for like fields of where they can do it.
Tremendously synergistic potential. And it's not to say that sometimes they won't compete to get the same energy. But I think what's likely to happen is that you're going to see AI data centers start to become Bitcoin mining companies. Because and this happened recently, this happened in Ireland, where a large AI hyperscaler wanted to get a contract with the grid operator. They were turned down. And not because the grid operator didn't want the money, but they looked at how much money they'd earned, and then they looked at how much it would cost them to upgrade the grid to be able to deliver that base load power. And it was going to cost a lot. And then they looked at what their decarbonization goals were, and they realized the AI data center would actually stand in the way of them being able to deliver. And so they said no. However, what AI data centers are now looking at is if they use even just 3% of their power for Bitcoin mining, suddenly that entire energy consumer is reclassified as a flexible load consumer, because now it can power up and power down. And that little bit of flexibility means that the cost to upgrade the grid is not nearly as much, and possibly there's no cost at all. Number one. And number two, it means that the grid operator is able to build out the grid using more variable renewable energy. And that's enabled simply because that AI hyperscaler is using a very small amount of Bitcoin mining as part of its overall load, which means it can win more contracts, but also means that when it has energy that otherwise it wouldn't be using, it can use it for something productive.
Interesting. I love the connection between AI and Bitcoin always. It's two such amazing revolutions going on that will change the world in such an impactful way. How do you see the AI actually impacting Bitcoin, if at all, in some way?
I think just the ways that Michael Seyr has already outlined, and that people will use AI in order to make inquiries about how you structure your Bitcoin treasuries and how you design new products so you can acquire more Bitcoin. Probably it's already having impact to trading algorithms. So there will be a two-way impact.
Interesting. The last topic that I want to get into today is kind of the social benefits of Bitcoin and what are kind of the impacts that Bitcoin has on us outside of number graph technology or like Bitcoin mining with grid balancing. But what is the impact that you're seeing that Bitcoin has on society on a social level?
So when I first looked at Bitcoin, my impression was uses too much energy, useless apart from speculative asset. Turns out I was wrong on both takes. And the reason I was wrong on the second take about it not having any use was not that it didn't have any use, but it didn't have any use that was being reported in media outlets that I was reading. Because a lot of that use was in areas which the Western media doesn't generally cover, such as Nigeria or Argentina or Afghanistan. But if you're in one of those areas where you are unbanked, 6 billion people worldwide are, or is living under high or hyperinflation, as 250 million people are, or if you're living in an autocratic regime or semi-autocratic regime, as 5 billion people are, then the use case for Bitcoin is even more pronounced than it is in the West. Now, it's not to say it doesn't have utility in the West too. It absolutely does. I'd be unable to collaborate with a writer in Kenya with my newsletter if we weren't able to transact in Bitcoin and I wasn't able to pay him effectively, because try doing that, translating US dollars or Costa Rican colones into shillings in Kenya. When you're talking about small regular payments, it's a nightmare, and you pay such a lot in remittances. So it removed that friction. So it has tremendous utility in the West, but in the developing world, so-called, it's often survival. If you want to protest against a corrupt government and not have your campaigns funds frozen, then Bitcoin's an answer. If you are in Afghanistan and you want to be able to pay women, or you are a woman, you want to set up a business where 80% of women are unbanked, and you have state-level discrimination against women saying you cannot open a bank account without your husband's permission, then it allows you to bypass that state-level gender discrimination. And if you're in Nigeria and you're seeing political unrest, you're seeing high inflation, high fuel costs, you're seeing the currency value against the US dollar just tank within 2 years, and you want to preserve wealth, then again, Bitcoin provides you a means to do that. And then a lot of people say, well, hang on, don't stablecoins do the same thing? In theory, yes, but in practice, stablecoins are highly centralized, so it's much easier for regimes such as Nigeria to clamp down on stablecoins, as they did, to have regulations which say that if you're a stablecoin trader, we're going to sue you if you're unlicensed, but then make it almost impossible for anyone to get a license, so you're effectively suing everyone. You're just making it very friction-filled to trade stablecoins. And then you attack the exchanges. Whereas Bitcoin doesn't require exchanges in order to be able to transfer Bitcoin from person to person. It's peer-to-peer. So because of this decentralized architecture, whilst a lot of authoritarian regimes want to curtail its use, they're much more readily able to do that with stablecoins. There's always someone you can ring up and pressure. There's a CEO of the company. There's all sorts of instruments by which you can still seize and freeze. There's no CEO of Bitcoin. You can say, hey, we want to seize this person's transactions. And that's the beauty of it. It is dictator-proof. So we've known this for a while. The Human Rights Foundation has been saying this for a while. Alex Gladstein has been a champion of this message for a while. And so part of my work has been to say, well, to what extent is this happening? And taking some of my approach, which is to quantify things, saying, well, how often is this happening? How many people are we talking about who are able to preserve their wealth who weren't before because of Bitcoin? How many people in Afghanistan have been able to receive payments as women or set up bank accounts, being your own bank, using Bitcoin, who weren't previously? How many people who were refugees have been able to flee from one country to another, and they couldn't take cash across borders, they couldn't take gold across borders, but they could take Bitcoin across borders? And how many people are we talking about who've been positively affected, who've been able to set up their lives from scratch? So these are the sorts of questions that I'm starting to dig into now. And it's important that we do, because otherwise these stories can get dismissed as one-off anecdotes. But what we're starting to find is these are not just one-off anecdotes. For every anecdote, every story of every war refugee who flees across the border from Ukraine, sets up in Hungary, who had $3,000, $2,000, $4,000 in Bitcoin and was able to reestablish their lives, we're finding that there may be hundreds and thousands of other people whose stories are untold. So part of the work I'm doing is to start to quantify how many people we're talking about who are already being benefited at an existential level because of the existence of Bitcoin.
It's a really interesting one. You're just at the starting point of that, or you already have some numbers?
Well, I can give you kind of a sneak preview. When it comes to refugees, the early indications, we're talking more than 100,000 people already. who have been able to move across borders, who, because of the existence of Bitcoin, have not had to reestablish their lives with nothing financially, but have had something, and would not have been able to do this with stable coins, gold, or cash.
Love that. I also love the word you said, dictator proof. It's a
That's
really
Alex
good one.
Bastein's term, and it's a great term. I can't take credit for that, but that's exactly what Bitcoin is.
That's amazing. I have one question that I asked each and every one of my guests, and the question is, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
One thing that I always try to be a good example of myself, and don't always succeed, but I try, is, as you can imagine, I have to deal with a lot of, let's just say, uneducated takes on Bitcoin a lot of the time. And it's very easy to get frustrated, exasperated, angry even. But the moment you've done so, you've actually lost the most important form of sovereignty, which is sovereignty over your own mind. And so by example, I always attempt, even if I'm responding to something which is nonsense, to direct the critique at the logic, not the person, and to make sure that I myself am in a calm state of mind when I'm doing so. And I find by doing that some people will actually engage with me. Some people will change their minds. But at least it allows a conversation rather than a debate. And I think that's been partly why a lot of the rebuttals that I've had have been effective, has been not getting caught up in debates, not making it personal, sticking to the data, staying emotionally detached as much as possible, and having respect that I'm talking to just another human being who's wrong on this point. I've been wrong too. And there, but for the grace of God, go I.
I love that. Like, not attacking the person, but debating or arguing about the thing, the logic, the object that we're actually doing. I think in a lot of debate, it's too quickly just about personal attacks all of a sudden, and not about the actual thing. So debates are really, it's more about entertaining at this point and less about actually getting to know a topic. I like a good debate, but it's really hard to find really good debates where you actually learn something and not just getting entertained to root for a person or something like that.
Yeah, it's kind of intellectual MMA in many cases, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a good comparison. I have an end routine in the podcast where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And the end routine, and the question for you is, what's the one thing you wish you knew when you first got into Bitcoin that you would like to tell your former self that's not related to buying more Bitcoin?
You've correctly anticipated the answer most people will give if you don't add that caveat. There's actually nothing, because whilst there's some things I could say, some mistakes I might have made, some assumptions I might have made, it's all been a process of learning, and I don't regret any of it. This whole journey, it's led me to leave New Zealand to live in Costa Rica for Bitcoin mining. It's completely left a complete pivot in what I've done in my life. But I think if I'd known that from scratch, it might have freaked me out and caused me not to go down that path. So I'm kind of happy that I didn't know. So in the theme of sometimes knowledge of ignorance is knowledge, there's some things you're not supposed to know. So I don't think I'd change anything.
That's beautiful. Letting the journey unfold how the journey is supposed to be unfolded. Really cool. Thank you so much, Daniel, for being such a great guest today. Before I let you go, where can people find you, ask you questions, and reach out to you?
Yeah, X remains probably the best way, at DS Batten. And we have a fund, CH4 Capital, which is going to be doing some more methane mitigation on landfills. That's ch4capital.com. Those would probably be the best two places.
Thank you so much for taking the time, and also thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye.